I think they got it.
You got it? Okay. All right. So this talk is DevOops Redux. I am not Kevin Johnson. I apologize for you that are disappointed.
It's that handsome man in the back.
In the back there. I'm not Kenneth Bone. I wish I was. He's got a cool sweater game. I am Ken Johnson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Invisium. I'm former Navy, U.S. Navy. I've talked about DevOps security before with Chris, advanced web hacking, and some of you might know me from RailsGoat, co-project owner with Mike McCabe. I run engineering, product focused at Invisium. So you can imagine when I do that for a security company, I have a lot of concerns, and that's sort of a part of which we'll get to what this talk, or how this talk originated, or at least how some of the pieces fit. So
that's me. I'm currently on the blue team over at Uber, doing incident response stuff mostly. Spent a bunch of years in the Army. That was awesome. That's why my knees hurt. And those are kind of the topics I've talked about. Primarily, most of my career, I've been a breaker. So breaking things, breaking into Oracle, Windows, phishing, purple teaming, doing a lot of purple teaming now, and then did the DevOps talk with Ken. So as I've moved to these California companies where they're actually using DevOps, it's obviously a natural slide and a natural fit to try to break that stuff. So that's what brought the other talk. And then we'll talk about the background for this talk as well. So yeah, now fullish time fixer, and I think if anybody saw Dave Lewis's talk yesterday, and I've talked to Josh Corman, there's a lot of people that are saying, hey, you should actually, if you're a red team guy, you should actually start doing blue team stuff. And since I've done that, I've learned a lot of things, and empathy has really come about. I've learned to love Python and the REST APIs, because that's not so bad. But I'm also like super astonished at the number of people that literally cannot internet. It's pretty bad, so it's been eye-opening.
So our original DevOps talk, which I believe was first done at LastCon, something like that.
Yeah, it's at LastCon.
Yeah, so essentially we just picked apart all of the tools that DevOps shops use, and figured out how to break, what was easiest to break into, what gave us the most impact, and then shared it with everybody. After that, though, folks asked us, okay, well, how do you fix, right? How do you fix these things? In tandem with that, when folks asked, how do we go about like securing our DevOps type shops, continuous development or continuous deployment rather. So our company actually had no legitimate attack, but we had the threat of an attack. And so while thinking about how to do this right, I also thought, okay, what is, both Chris and I have gone through this. What's practical? What do we actually need to secure? And I think what I find interesting anyways about my own talk, it's weird to say, right? But is that, so this isn't necessarily super AppSec focused, it's more of a meld of our two lines of work, right? Application security and network security. So.
Yeah, and I'll add that this has kind of been my life the last 3 years of how do you secure these developer environments where these guys and girls have to basically do whatever they want on their workstations. Has to be very much allowed. And then in my case, both at Facebook and now current and at Uber, fairly open from an egress point of view. So how do you defend a network when a lot of things can just go outbound? That actually forces you to look at things at the host level rather than the network level, which is a unique challenge. So we're going to talk about a bit of that.
Yeah, and actually in the Netflix talk yesterday, they were saying that engineers that come on board are pretty quickly given prod access. And that's pretty indicative of the environments that we're talking about. So I'm going to hand this over to you.
Oh, thanks. Oh, so there's a lot of slides. We'll be around after, but we have the whole hour, so we'll pace ourselves. You have the links to the slides. And then we're going to break this up into human stuff, host-based stuff like I was talking about, and then infrastructure, which is going to primarily be AWS infrastructure. So starting with the employee intelligence and like basically the human thing. So we're going to make it difficult for our employees to get us hacked. So examples of things that we need to do. We need to monitor pastebin-like services for data about our network or hashes or anything. GitHub, like the Netflix guys talked about yesterday, pretty common for people that are using GitHub to have organizations and people accidentally check in what should be private, make it in their public repos. So examples of things we talked about the last talk are the things that Ken and I see all the time. Slack tokens in GitHubs, lots of interesting configs and like the dot files or their .zsh files for, everybody wants to upload their dot files to GitHub so they can put them on any dev server they got to jump on. And then lots of tokens and logs and snippets and error messages. You want to find those things because they can be used. And I'm sure everybody can think of many cases where people have found those and have used them. Like code search should be code search.
Yeah, code search.
Code search is probably the big example that everybody uses where lost AWS key, someone logged in and
code spaces.
Code
sorry,
spaces.
Yeah.
Lost those configs and then everyone logged in and deleted all their stuff and that company's out of business.
Has anyone heard of code spaces? Yeah, exactly. Cool.
All right,
awesome.
Look it up. It's pretty cool. Yeah. All right. So monitoring GitHub, you can use Scrumbler. Saw that yesterday. We're going to be trying that out. Can totally use that. You can also use internal tools, but they're kind of hard to use sometimes. So GitLab, Gitolite. You can pay for GitHub Enterprise. A lot of people use Fabricator. Oh, see, there's the guy leaving 1 minute into it. But most people don't. You use GitHub because GitHub's super convenient. But then you have the problem that you need to monitor what people are doing because people make mistakes and they will post internal repos to their public repo. It happens a lot. I've talked to many people. It happens all the time. The Netflix guys mentioned it yesterday that it happens there too. So it's something you want to be aware of and something that you want to fix as soon as possible. So how you can tackle that? You can have most places have the employees join their org so you can kind of know who's who. You can regularly crawl those list of members, check out the repos, and then do regexes, which is exactly what Scrumbler can do. But a tool called GitRob also does that. Has anybody heard of this? So yeah, so it's pretty nice. You probably need to add a few regexes on your own to do some more things, but it's a good starting point if you don't want to build your own system to do that. It kind of looks like that when you run it. I've been doing bug bounty stuff, so I like to start with seeing has anybody checked in anything awesome into the company's repos. So in this case, I think this was Magneto. Then it found, hey, someone had checked in a git config, and inside that git config was their GitHub tokens, right? So that's not good. I've also found plenty of AWS keys. Those are the favorite. I think everybody loves those. So those are things that we want to identify and get rid of as quickly as possible. So going with that, I like to troll GitHub and look for AWS keys, and I got bored one weekend and wrote some code that basically takes an AWS secret key, an access key, and then tries it against every Bodo function that you can do to see what you have access to. So Nimbus Stratus does this for like 5 to 6 hosts, and then I went and found out there's like probably closer to 50 in AWS land. And so what we did is, so on the top there it shows, hey, that's an invalid key. At the bottom shows, hey, that's a root account. You really don't need to do anything else because you have root for everything. Then it keeps going. It starts once it starts brute forcing to see, okay, well, do I have access to EC2? Do I have access to SQS? What do I have access to, right?
By the way, these aren't example access keys that he put together himself. These are ones he pulled off the internet that were disclosed. So
yeah, then I let them know, but it's always fun to see if they work.
To reiterate. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing, try to list S3 buckets. So very quickly identify what you have access to, because a lot of times from a blue team perspective, you can usually just log into IAM and actually look. If you're pen testing or if you're a bad guy, I don't have that luxury. I need to figure out what I have access to, and there's more to AWS than EC2. So here's some example tools that you can use if you got to monitor pastebin. Dumpmon is one. Has anybody used that or seen this? Cool. It's worth checking out. You can basically configure it to look for whatever you want, and then tweet it to the world or just send it to yourself. There's 4 pay services. Anybody heard of Recorded Future? So if you don't want to roll your own, you could pay people like Recorded Future to do that for you, and they'll monitor keywords that you look for, things for your company, across all that, if you have money to do that. If you're looking for creds, places like Hold Security will look on the dark web and in the internet for you for your company's creds or anything useful to you. Also useful if you don't want to do that or you don't speak Russian. That's yours.
All right. So that was mostly about catching stuff that's accidentally exposed from an application security side of the house, from a just making sure code is pristine One tool I started using and did a trial with was Git Monitor. I really liked it. There are a few things that are pretty nice here. For one, if somebody force pushes to like the master branch, you can get a notification on it. One of the things I thought was really nice with it was that you can have a specific sort of unique keyword in the comments for when a pull request is merged. And if that specific keyword is not in that merge, then you get a notification. Really useful if you want security to undergo a review for a specific application every time there's a merge or something along those lines. So there's a few things you can monitor in terms of merging and pushing code. So really useful tool.
All right, let's transition to some of the things you want to do if you've got to worry about people that are their hosts, so Windows hosts or Linux hosts or OS 10 hosts. So kind of the outline for that. OS Query, anybody heard of OS Query? A couple. It's pretty awesome. It allows you to basically instrument Linux and Mac, and now there is a Windows thing for I think Windows 10 and above. But it's super useful. I won't read all that to you, but basically you can enumerate all this data about a system and then use a SQL, basically SQL to query that. And it also has built in the ability to forward all those logs to a central place so you could actually alert on them and do something with those. So if you're managing like a Mac fleet or any kind of like Ubuntu fleets or whatever, you should check that out as a way to get data off of a host. Comes with, so here's all the different queries you can do. Ad hoc, so like on the fly, I want to know something. Scheduled, collect different logs. It has tripwire functionality. You can use Yara rules to look for known bad binaries. And it actually ships with a ton of query packs. And that's probably completely illegible, but basically Facebook, it's a Facebook open source product, gives you tons and tons of query packs so you can look for known badness out of the box. And then it's pretty easy to write your own if you're looking for something specific or you're worried about a specific config in your organization, like you want to make sure everyone has disk encryption enabled. There's query packs for that, or you can roll your own to make sure the chef is working or whatever you want to do. So that's kind of what it looks like. Like we feed ours into Splunk and then allows you to, hey, for all that, for any query pack, show me all the hits for that query pack. So it just allows you to find things quickly. Doorman, anybody heard of Doorman? Nobody. Awesome. All right, so if you, what's that?
It says useful information.
Glad I'm here. Yeah. Now you've heard of it. It allows you to actually manage that fleet. So if you want to push a change, most of the time you'd have to push a change via Chef or Puppet. Doorman would allow you to, if you want to search the fleet for something, if you're using Doorman, you could actually run that query and do that based on the node. So it kind of looks like that. You have a fancy web interface. Super blurry. Fancy web interface that shows all your nodes and then will allow you to do actions on all the nodes in the enterprise. So if you're using OS Query and then you want to actually do things on those hosts in a ad hoc kind of way, this is a great tool to do that. Anybody heard of BlockBlock? Sweet, man. Everybody's getting the education there.
I guess.
Sweet. All right, so basically it's a kernel extension that looks to see whenever you've got any software that's trying to persist, it will like let you know. Like, hey, I'm bad. I'm trying to add this to the launch statement, so I started everything at startup, and do you want to allow that or not? So enable your people locally to make some safe and smart decisions. You can use a tool like that. How about Little Snitch? All right, cool.
Yes.
Yeah, finally. Host-based firewall. You should definitely use it. Help people out. It also, as long as they don't click allow all, which is pretty annoying. It can do if you don't tune it. Kind of looks like that. How about Carbon Black? Sweet. I love Carbon Black. Carbon Black's awesome if you can afford it. Host-based agent basically allows you to do file writes, file read, network connections outbound, registry writes, you name it, you can write rules for it. Some examples of things I've seen or that we use. So looking for Mimikatz. Everybody know what Mimikatz is? Kinda. All right. AppSec concert.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, for example, he signs all those binaries with his own code signing cert that says Gentle Kiwi in there. So if someone drops one of those and runs it, Carbon Black is going to log that activity, and then you can search for it and see, hey, where in the fleet has someone used this file vault encryption disabled or not? Like, is someone turning that off? Is someone turning it on? If someone's uninstalling Carbon Black, that's good to know. Everybody, less of a problem now, but it used to be unsigned jars doing bad stuff and connecting to the internet. You can look for things like that. Unsigned binaries and temp doing net connections, because that may be indicative of something bad happening.
Yeah, I think most people in this room definitely have had experience with that at least.
Right.
Should.
Same thing, and then it also works for Mac, so you can do, if anyone's using the Stroke network utility to port scan or try to find hashes off of those boxes, you can do that too. So it kind of looks like that. This is one for doing PowerShell. So you have cmd.exe was the parent process. It kicked off PowerShell, and then PowerShell started doing those follow-on activities. So it can help you identify badness. You can write rules to look for things like PowerShell with a command line of dash encoded or no profile or whatever you want to search for. Same thing for Mac. You can look for known badness or abnormal behavior. And Sysmon, I won't go into it, but it's poor man's Carbon Black. It works on Windows, has much of the same Carbon Black functionality, less so of like how to get that data somewhere. But Carlos Perez and Jason Craig have given some talks about how to do that. You can forward the logs off with Windows syslog and get equivalent data as Carbon Black out of there. It's just a little bit more painful. Is this one still me?
Yes.
And Splunk. So, once you have all these logs, you have to put them somewhere so you can actually generate alerts. So you have instrumentation. Now you want to get it into a place where, if you're Ken, who does everything, or Ken has to look at it, but ideally you have some sort of SOC or blue team or some sort of team that needs to look at that data and do some analysis and look for bad stuff. So Splunk is an option. It is free for a bit, but to get the most of the best functionality, you're going to have to buy something. They have a lot of good apps that actually help you out and can do a lot of things you would normally search for queries. So this just shows endpoints that are checking in and then some other things about it. Everyone's probably heard of Splunk. So aside from Splunk, if you want to go a less expensive model, you can certainly use an Elk stack, so Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Logstash to actually take all those logs from somewhere, shove them into, have Logstash aggregate them and normalize them, shove them into Elasticsearch, and then use Kibana in the same way that you would use Splunk to look for those things. So it kind of looks like that. Is anybody using any of that? Yep, cool.
Awesome. Okay, so this is me.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you do it all, and maybe you don't have an enterprise budget, we'll say, but you need an enterprise patching management type solution. Google created Simian, which is a really nice package deployment option for OS X. The packages are in monkey format. That's like XML, right? It's, as I said, free. I think one thing to note though is that you will have some storage costs, right? There are going to be some storage costs associated with this after a certain amount of machines are running using Simian. So here's where you can download Simian. I think there's two important pieces to Simian. There's the client and then there's the server, right? The web application runs up in Google Cloud, obviously. And that's where you manage, your clients. That's where you push out patches from. That's where you can see if like disk space is low or whatever the case is. And in terms of the client, that's a DMG that you package up. One thing that's really nice about it is that you're going to have your private and public key plus a config that you need to have on a per user basis. So you can put that all into the DMG. I highly recommend, GPG encrypting or whatever you need to do to make sure it's secure when you transfer it or install it on a computer. But once you've done that, it's connected to the mothership, and you can push out patches all day long. It's sort of what it looks like. I can tell you all the versions of the OS that folks are running. Again, really centralized. This is OSX related, if I didn't mention that. And beyond that, I think that you should know that it's going to be a little bit difficult to get set up with in the beginning. It does take about a week. It's like moderately difficult to read through and figure it out. But once you do, it's free, it's worth it, works really well, easy to maintain. Okay, so now this is the AWS part of the talk. So before we get started, who's using AWS? Fantastic.
Yay, relevancy.
Awesome. Well, now we know the talk's relevant. So cool. As a CTO, as somebody responsible for securing AWS, I needed to make sure a few things happened, right? Needed to harden, monitor, and be able to recover. Extremely important. And the monitoring piece is really important, right? If you suspect that attack is ongoing, or if you don't and you don't know that it's happening, you could really pay for that. And I mean that literally, and we'll talk about that later. But when you follow AWS's guidelines, if you've ever taken like their security CBT, you'll find that a lot of what I, Chris and I crafted is really does follow along with their guidelines. So it's kind of nice.
Probably
the two lined up.
What's relevant there if you want to go back, one was the financially responsible piece of that, right?
Yeah, we're gonna get to that in the QR thread. But yeah,
Okay. Never mind.
If you don't follow this, I'll show you, I'll show you an example of this. But if you don't follow this, you could very well pay for it. Yeah, we'll get into that. So hardening basics. Don't use the root account. That's a super obvious one. And when we talk about monitoring, that'll become even more relevant. Disable access keys to the root account. Again, there will be a theme here, and that'll follow with it. We're going to talk about multi-factor authentication along with multi-factor authentication on the API, which is something that I don't think a lot of people have. I've talked to a couple people here, one specifically, and some people are trying to do it, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to do if you've never enabled it. So we'll go through that. With the root account, every AWS environment needs a root account. It is God of that environment. You should not be using this operationally. And again, when we get into the monitoring with CloudWatch section, we're going to cover that. When it comes to these access keys that are associated with the root account, we talked about that. Just go ahead and delete them. But one thing we didn't mention was to have a verbal as well as written policy that this account doesn't get used unless it's absolutely necessary. When it comes to multi-factor authentication, you have two routes that you can go inside of AWS. You can do this virtually with Google Authenticator or something along those lines, or you can use the hardware that AWS allows you to use, which is Gemalto. The full list are on these slides. And if you came late, you missed the link that we put out there, but we'll probably show it at the end again for these slides. All right, so what I should mention is with multi-factor authentication, you as an administrator have to allow users to be able to manage their own multi-factor authentication. Otherwise, and I know, Chris, you can point to some examples of this, people might, email QR codes around. Not such a great thing to do, right? The QR code is obviously how you activate that MFA device. So you want to give them the ability to do that. Well, you just have to use this. You guys got that, right? No, all right. So this link is actually where you can find the policy that you attach to each user. Once you attach that policy, they'll be able to, you'll have to tweak it a little bit, but they'll be able to manage their own MFA device, and they'll be able to keep that managed and organized. So, all right, root. You should need a multi-factor authentication code for root. Whether or not it needs to be shared, I'd advocate it should. If you need to do that, you can use AWS offers TOTP, so you can leverage the TOTP protocol. Things like 1Password, they allow you to, take a screenshot of that QR code and share the MFA for root with others. And I really do, obviously restrict who's got access, but I really recommend doing that. If the root account gets owned by somebody like this who found it on the internet, you're gonna have a bad day.
You may not want to share it with a whole engineering team, right? Unless it's a two-person engineering team.
Yeah,
right?
probably for the best.
If you got 1,000 people in your engineering team, best not to put that in that shared one.
Now, everybody talks about multi-factor authentication, but what I didn't hear a lot of people talk about was enabling multi-factor authentication on the AWS API. So to do this is actually really simple. You choose a policy that you want to have multi-factor authentication required on, and you add this one line to it. So to enable it, it's really easy. To actually get people to use it and not scream at you is not so easy, right? So we're going to cover that.
That friction, yo.
Yeah, so things aren't going to work when you do this on the API, and we're going to, when we talk about the frequency of this exploit, or of AWS being exploited, we're going to pinpoint the fact that the API is where this is happening. So this is incredibly important. So I just bring that up because when you get a little bit of friction or this becomes a little bit difficult, know that it's worth it because it's where you're most likely, if you're running AWS, to get exploited is through the API. So we're going to talk about STS now. The security token service is essentially how you get a temporary set of credentials. So what happens is, and I've got this link with some code on it that I wrote. You give your access key ID, your secret, the duration that you want these temporary credentials to be okay for, along with the virtual device or whatever, the MFA code that you've got. And if you've set those temporary credentials for the day, then for just the day, you can use those pretty freely. And if they were exposed, then, oh well, because tomorrow relevance-wise and risk-wise, tomorrow they'll be renewed. So,
yeah, there are some hacks around renewing those. If you have enough of a privilege level to do that, you can set it up so that they get renewed. But more or less, the idea is they get checked into GitHub tomorrow. They're not useful.
All right. And this is an example of running the code that the gist was linked to. And these are the three pieces that you're going to get back. Like I said, ID, secret, and temporary token. And you can use those. You can see this is just an example of using EC2 API tools, passing in -o, -w, -t options. And those are, like I said, the ID, secret, and session token. You can see that it still worked. Everything's still fine. It's just one extra step that people have to jump through. And really, oh well, honestly, it's worth it. And in case you don't like Ruby, because I know a lot of people hate on me for liking Ruby, there's Python and Bash if you're interested in that. And then in terms of overcoming challenges, things that won't work right off the bat, Elastic Beanstalk. Elastic Beanstalk doesn't support STS. So you need to use either GitHub or code commit or an S3 bucket. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's an option where you can pull in code from those repositories using the code pipeline, and you can overcome the issues that you would have with STS to deploy code. So password policy, not going to go over this in a huge, way, but you should enable passwords or enable a password policy. You should have one. And I say that because I've reviewed enough AWS environments to see that they don't have one. And so that's a little strange. Have one. So recap, make AWS harder to get to in a very practical, sensible way. All right, it's not magic. Things we didn't talk about in this talk: S3 bucket policies, encrypting EC2 volumes, security groups, locking those down. Those are things we really don't need to talk about because if you Google AWS security, there's about 100,000 checklists out there that cover all of this, as well as AWS's operational and auditing and security checklists. But I would say use Trusted Advisor. It's very low cost, and it'll give you like the low-hanging fruit that those checklists, tell you to cover. Okay, here's an example of some of those checklists. Again, you can download this PowerPoint later and get them. All right, so monitoring. We want to let me get some water actually real quick, sorry. So we want to detect malicious activity, right? And we want that in real time. So there's a few services that actually help us with doing that are built into AWS. You don't have to buy anything, there's no widgets, you're just going to configure some stuff. So I will say that when you turn these services on, you're going to get a lot of noise, so be prepared to figure out how to filter. CloudTrail, SNS, CloudWatch, and config. CloudTrail is essentially where all logs for AWS get stored, and I'll show you a diagram in a second. SNS is how you receive notifications when things have triggered an alert. When some change or some activity has triggered an alert, it's going to get pushed to SNS, and SNS is going to notify you and your team. And then there's CloudWatch, right? And config, which are going to detect whatever activity you configure them to detect. Here's a diagram of all of the services that are sort of filtering directly into our logging, and we'll get pulled out later to trigger some notifications to you. So this is essentially what it looks like. You can see in the middle, config and CloudWatch pull from CloudTrail, and they push to SNS. All right, in terms of CloudTrail, it's very easy to use. You simply turn it on. That's it. Turn it on. And immediately it starts logging everything that's going on in your AWS environment. There are some configurable options. We walk through those in the slides. Give your CloudTrail bucket a name. Allow the authorization of an IAM roll through, and it's enabled. That's it. That's all you got to do. The first step is just turn it on. Now, for SNS, to get this going, well, first of all, let me say that I love it. It allows you to get instant notifications via SMS. It works very well. You don't have to build any extra queuing yourself. Emails, whatever. Post an API that you've built. That might be how you decide to filter out all of the alerts you get. So you can receive notifications for very important things. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we go through some of the alerts that we're going to set up. To set it up, you just create a topic. Create a topic that's important. Like this one says root account usage, right? We're circling back to the whole root account being used piece. So you create a topic, and then you subscribe to it in some form or fashion. This is SMS. This is email. You can have multiple subscribers that subscribe to a single topic. I do want to mention, set these up first if you know what alarms you're going to be setting up, because when we go into CloudWatch and config, if you don't have those set up already, you're going to have to exit out of what you're doing to go into SNS, set it up, and then go back into the services and complete configuration.
So config. Ken gets to drink water now. So basically it allows you to do resource inventory, configuration history, and then pick what you want to monitor for change notifications. You can define your own things. It comes pre-packaged with a whole bunch of options, which I'll show in a second. The idea is you can do discovery, compliance, change management, and then it can assist with all your incident response activities as well, because it should have a log of what changed when someone changed it, and that may be the key piece of information you need to figure out how something got owned. So here's some examples of the ones that come pre-packaged. Is CloudTrail enabled? Is incoming SSH disabled? All the other ones. Big list down at the bottom.
Yeah, these are like basic compliance rules, essentially.
So they try to help you out with a bunch of other stuff to start with. So things you can have alerts set up for, a change in the firewall or the security groups, changes in your VPC. So someone has broken in, they're able to make VPC changes to allow ports in or allow their add keys or do whatever you want. You want to log all that and be able to do something later with it. Really, any change at all that you want to monitor, you can with config. So to kind of get started with that, you basically put the resources that you want to monitor. Then you can just choose everything if you're hardcore. Create your bucket, create the SNS topic like Ken was talking about, and then make the magic happen.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If it's not in there when you get to that step, you got to start this whole thing over again.
Right. So yeah, that's why it's in that order, because then you can't pick it if you haven't created it yet, which I guess is not necessarily true. That we'll discuss it next. We already talked about it. Yeah. And then allow the role that you want to be created and set.
All right. Cool. All right. So CloudWatch is a little bit more interesting. Some of the things we talked about, just enabling them and using them. Right. CloudWatch is pretty cool because you can be, if you look at config, it's sort of like kind of a dumb tool. It just tracks anything that's changing. And CloudWatch is more of you defining what specific events should trigger an alarm, right? So the 4 use cases that we're going to cover are billing alerts, tracking root account usage, and then failed login attempts. And then there's unauthorized activity that kind of ties back to the interrogate tool that you wrote. So in terms of the billing alarm, it's pretty easy to set up. The reason that you set this up is that if somebody breaks in, what we've seen over and over again is people, they kind of find out like, hey, I'm spending $20,000 or $30,000 overnight, and I only spend like 500 or whatever the case may be. So this is kind of a nice little heads up that somebody's spinning up EC2 instances in your environment or whatever they're spinning up and using. So to do this, you go into billing and you first allow yourself to receive billing alerts. And then next, you go in and you create a topic, root account usage, whatever the case is, you subscribe to it, and then you go into CloudWatch. When you go into CloudWatch, there's something on the left I want you all to pay attention to. There are metrics and there are logs. Think of metrics as these are predefined things that you can go in and say, hey, you already know about billing numbers. And so I want to say, hey, if I'm exceeding this number, then cool, give me an alert. Logs, however, you delving into the logs, searching for something specific, and then triggering on that. I think we're boring people. Yeah,
You're
sorry.
boring, man.
All right, so go in, choose your billing alert. This is US dollars that we're choosing here because we're in the US. Put in a number. This is 1,600. We chose 1,600 as our monthly spend that we don't want to go over or we want to get alerted on if we go over. Enter that, create the alarm. I've got exact steps here. So once this is created, now every time you start to go over that monthly spend number, you get a notification. So whoever has subscribed in whatever form or fashion to that topic is how you're going to get alerted, the SNS topic. And again, exact steps at this link. Root account login. Why is this important? Okay, so this is more than just me talking about something that you configure. I want to give you an actual use case around this. So when our team enabled this, remember I said, hey, don't use your root account operationally. That's a bad idea. So now when somebody has to, absolutely has to use the root account, they tell somebody that they're going to use it. The reason is when they don't, and we see these alerts, everybody panics, everybody freaks out. It's like, hey, nobody told us they were going to be using this, and you become that guy or girl. So that wasn't on purpose. That was just something that sort of came along culturally as we enabled these alerts. So kind of a nice thing that we found an actual use case for this, or found when we actually use this. So to enable it, it's again very simple, but instead of going to metrics, you go into logs within CloudWatch. Once you go to logs, you choose the CloudTrail log that's relevant, and then you go into where you put in a sort of an expression, and I give a link at the end. We give a link at the end where there's this list of expressions that you can use to find events. This one's just to see if the root account actually logged in. Follow the steps. They're very, very easy to follow. And then create the alarm once that's complete. And you basically say, hey, look, if this person's logged in within the last 5 minutes, send an alert. That's really the end of it with the root account. And again, with this, we've got exact steps. Failed logins. All right, so in the event that someone's trying to break in, we obviously want to know about it. I'll talk a little bit about its limitations here with this, what I actually found. To save time, the steps are pretty much the same as the last one. The only thing that changes is that little filter pattern that we use. That's it. It's the only thing that's different. Steps are the same. And again, we have exact steps. So with this, the only problem is when you get this alarm, it doesn't tell you exactly like who's trying to log in and who's having the issue and when exactly or what IP was it from and some exact details. So working on a fix for this. As soon as I can get that done, I'll probably add it to these slides. But there are some limitations I want you to be aware of with this. So unauthorized activity alarm. Now this goes back to the tool that Chris wrote. If somebody actually, they've grabbed your access key, it was exposed, and they want to see what they can do in your environment, this is the alarm that actually prevents them from doing anything. So I'm giving you the, the exploit side and the defensive side. All right, so in the interest of time, as far as the root account login and the failed login alarm, the steps are pretty much the same. Regex is, of course, different, or the filter pattern. I call it regex, but that's what it is. All right, so when we run the interrogate tool, this is an example of us taking the interrogate tool. I've kind of blacked out some things I don't want you to see, but when we run the tool, you can see that we immediately get a notification allowing us to decipher, hey, something's going on. Someone's trying to do something they shouldn't be authorized to do, which I think is not only, when you think about it, it's not only relevant from a like, hey, somebody's they've stole a key, and they're trying to figure out what they can do, but it's also relevant for like the insider threat, right? The people that have minimal access that are maybe trying to do something or access data they shouldn't be. And I know there's some companies out there that have to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's relevant if you have actual roles in the organization of like who should be able to access what, and you've got some segmentation and separation. You could definitely create an alarm from an abuse or fraud perspective or internal insider threat thing of, hey, this group should not have access to that, and I want to know when someone tries to access that piece of data or that S3 bucket or whatever it is.
Yep. Yes.
So that's how you can do it.
And then for the filter patterns, if you want to dig deeper, you absolutely should. This is the bare minimum. These are the bare minimums you should apply to your AWS environment. Obviously, you should dig in more. So, all right. So this is you, right?
Yeah. Splunk. Yay.
Yay.
Back to Splunk. Splunk's all right. So it's a good resource for monitoring that. It also comes with plugins for AWS. And do you need enterprise for that though?
Yeah, you need
do need the enterprise. So like I mentioned, a lot of the cool functions are turned into Splunk apps, which does require you to outlay a little bit of cash. But those are the two really good Splunk apps that allow you to import various data about your AWS account into that. Things like billing, can create topology maps. There we go. See, no booze. And then all the things listed there. So that's all useful to know. And if you're a Splunk shop, it's useful to have that in one place and create alerts on it. So this is an example of hosts that you're running. Is that right, Ken?
Yep.
With the app, it can map out the things that you have created and make a network graph for you, so you can get an idea of things, visually see if things have started up, or other things like that.
That part's really nice. It's really useful.
Spend, so you can also kind of get a visual idea of who's spending what. If you've got developers spinning up and doing whatever they want on any given day. Could want to know when the guy stood up the one with the 2 beast GPUs and they're cracking passwords for fun on it. One of those $1,000 a day AWS instances. So it does need an account in order to retrieve that data. You can create the account and then grab the necessary permission policy at that link, but it does work pretty well. Highly recommend that if you're using Splunk or using AWS to use that, it can pull in a lot of those alerts for you if you don't want to configure them like Ken showed us. Then you basically, you cannot read that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Basically, you just set it up, configure each input, and you're good to go. So to view things like IAM activity, you subscribe to that log via SNS, and then use SQS to subscribe to that topic.
Yeah.
Or that's
SQS basically queues up, and SNS subscribes to that, and then you get Splunk gets a notification. Yeah. Right. So you can see, like, again, I think expanding on that. I mean, yeah, some of our alerts will trigger you immediately, right? But when you want to go in and just do like a weekly audit or whatever the case is with Splunk, it's really nice because you can see like more than just unauthorized activity. You can see, hey, somebody switched their SSH key pair, or they changed their password, or whatever the case is. There's a lot of activity you can view with that Splunk app.
Yeah, I mean, you can also use Splunk to generate your queries and alerts, and that can also feed into your SIM if you're using that, right? So any Splunk query can be turned into an alert, which can be turned into forwarded to ArcSight or Phantom Cyber or whatever you're using to monitor that stuff. You want to do it?
Yeah. So just you want to be aware when things happen that they're happening, right? I mean, that's essentially like the moral of my story personally. When there was a threat of attack, what I realized very quickly was that if something had happened with AWS, there's like no way we would have known. Absolutely. I mean, we would have known. There is a way we would have known. We would have known when we saw our bill. Yeah. And when nothing worked and we're embarrassed, sure. Yeah, then we would know. Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of being proactive while something's happening, monitoring was incredibly important and very, for me, again, and I know for Chris as well, very personal thing that we needed to make sure that we did. So it's our responsibility. And also, since we break stuff, we feel like we should probably show how to do that.
I'm trying to be a fixer as well, so give some ways to catch me.
Yeah. So in terms of the Cure thread that I keep mentioning, there's a few things I just want to point out real quickly. Okay, so one thing is AWS has like a little review board, right? And so let's say your company got hacked and you don't have $50,000 a month to spend, you've got 2,000 or 1,000, whatever the case is. All right, so you go up for review. You say, hey, look, yeah, we were hacked, but we don't have the money to pay for this. This is a huge hit. What AWS says is, hey, did you do the minimums? We give you all of these checklists. We give you free CBTs. We give you all this information. Did your company do the absolute minimum required to secure your environment? And if the answer is no, you might find yourself paying anyways. Hopefully you've got insurance. So that's sort of like the reason that I implore you to at least try to do these bare minimum security pieces here. Another thing that was interesting, I mean, Chris and I already know this, and I think probably a lot of people in this audience know this, but there are bots every day scouring GitHub, scouring Bitbucket. They're looking for these keys. That's all they do. They want to find an open AWS environment where they can spin things up, or they can spend your money. So the last,
I personally did it, and I found a couple a day easily. So
yeah,
that's manually looking.
Not a bot.
Not a bot. CG bot.
Yeah. So on that note, again, when we talk about relevance, when you go through just that one thread alone, not like the other places where you're looking to see, hey, who did this happen to? When you go through that thread alone, this happened over and over and over again to folks. Like, it was like, yep, me too, yep, me too. And it's just sort of, it's kind of sad, but it's preventable. That's, I guess, what it comes down to. And again, API, multi-factor authentication, we'll get to that in a second.
Do you want to let him ask a question? Or?
Sure, yeah, actually.
Yeah, we're doing good on time.
We're doing good on time, yeah.
I don't know.
In the sense of, okay, so the question is, if it's so easy.
Why?
Question to Amazon. Is there anybody who works at Amazon?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Amazon, if you're listening, you need to create a bot that does this and alert your customers. Belay my last.
The comment was they do that some for the recording.
Okay, so we're going to get to restoration and recovery now. This is sort of like the last piece of this presentation. Again, plan to fail, don't fail to plan. I think that's a good motto. Biggest thing here, don't use AWS to back up your AWS, right? And there's a very big caveat with that. Talking about your primary account, or don't use the same AWS account to back up your stuff. I'm pretty sure everybody in this room can figure out why. There are a lot of people that haven't figured out why, but somebody gets access, they burn everything down to the ground, you're not going to have your backups anymore, right? So you can't restore from nothing. So the thing that I have seen work, though, is using like a secondary or tertiary account that only a security or SecOps team has access to. And that AWS environment is super locked down, and they use S3 and Glacier to actually keep backups pushed over to that account. And that's actually a reasonable approach, because the other approach, there's not a silver bullet for it, right?
Especially if it's read-only, right?
It's
just pulling that data and can't delete it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So otherwise, you have to, there's no service you can pay as of right now. So if anybody's got any startup ideas they're looking for, there's no service right now. It's like a silver bullet where you hand them cash and they like back up your AWS that I could find anyways.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to hack that.
Yeah. So list of common things to back up and resources on how to do some of this.
All right, so incident response, and it's actually the same thing, plan to fail, just don't fail to plan. It could actually be his whole talk, we're not gonna do it. If you kind of, from like a blue teamy perspective, Scout, anybody heard of Scout 2? No, check it out, because it basically allows you to give it some IAM keys, and then it enumerates and checks out all the configs, who has access to what, makes a fancy report for you. And I'll also throw a pitch to Andrew Krug and Alex McCormick's talk they gave at DerbyCon on hardening AWS. So it covered a bit of what we talked about, but more importantly, they have a whole incident response suite. So in the ability you guys want to handle that, or try to take that on, or have the ability to take that on, I encourage you to check that out. They've got, if you have all like the Linux kernels and things for all the AMIs. So if you need to do memory forensics, you need to basically make a kernel module that will load, allow you to pull memory from the images. they have a whole suite of tools that do that for you. So if that's something you're interested in and just don't want to call in the Mandiant, Blackhawk to help you out, you can check out that talk.
Okay, so I guess we're finished.
That's it.
10 minutes left.
Are there any questions?
Yay. Are you clapping because we're finished or clapping because you?
Definitely because we're finished.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So questions, I guess. Oh, good point. Thank you.
I should have put that at the end.
Yeah.
Oops.
So the question was, can you put this URL? For those of you that were late, you don't get to download it, no. This is just the URL where you can download the slides.
How well do Windows workstations integrate into some of these like in-elk solutions?
Okay, so the question was how well do Windows workstations integrate into Elk? You have to have some sort of syslog type thing to forward them. So I don't think there's Logstash for Windows, but you could use a syslog, forward them to the collector, and it works just fine. Yeah, it will collect all the Windows events or whatever you want to throw at it.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of alerts and monitoring that you need to do. What sorts of tools do you use to like manage everything that happens after that, all the follow-up, what the team follows up on?
So the question was, what tools do we use to do the follow-up kind of triage and response to these alerts? Do you want?
Well, I think the triage in terms of incident response or triage instead of just being like just proactive, Well, I guess it's incident response altogether.
So
right?
I'll say we feed all of ours into I think it's into Phantom Cyber, which is like ArcSight or whatever. So it goes into a SIM. Those kinds of tools generally allow you to enrich those alerts. So this user ID did something, and it will have a context worker that will, okay, who is that person? That's turning user ID into a phone number via the information from Active Directory. They went to it went to a weird IP. Who is the IP? And just shoves all that data in there. So whoever's triaging can at least have a bigger or a better picture of what's going on, and hopefully decide, is this something that I can just close out and ignore as like normal developer activity, or is this something that we need to rally the troops and look into? I can talk to you a little bit more about that if you want. Yes, sir.
Could you re-say that you have a twist on the Ben Franklin quote on the fail to plan? Can you say it again?
Oh.
It's plan to fail, but don't fail to plan.
Anything else? All right, cool. Hit us up on Twitter or whatever if you have questions or hate. I won't respond to hate.
I coughed on the red cards, so.
Yeah, don't touch the red cards. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.